The FBI is asking people on the internet for help unlocking the secrets of this mysterious message. Hidden in a cornfield 20 miles outside of St. Louis, Missouri, police found the severely decomposed remains of what seemed to be a male homicide victim. The man's identity and the cause of his death were mysteries in their own right. But the most mystifying aspect of this case would turn out to be what was stuffed inside the man's pockets. A note that seemed to be written in a secret code, the likes of which no one had ever seen. Was this the mark of a serial killer toying with police, or was it a dead man's desperate message to investigators from beyond the grave? Regardless of who wrote it, the truth remains. Whatever secrets are hidden within these rows of seemingly random letters and numbers could finally solve the mystery of a man's inexplicable death. Do you have what it takes to crack the code? The FBI thinks you might. But before we decode anything, we need to look through the case details for valuable clues. So let's take a trip back to June 30th, 1999, St. Charles County, Missouri. At approximately 12:45 p.m., the St. Charles County Sheriff's Department received a call. It was from a woman who had been driving alongside a field near Route 367, close to West Alton, Missouri, when she spotted a dark mound lying among the crops. As she got closer, she discovered that it was a human body decomposing in the sweltering Missouri heat. Before investigators even arrived at the cornfield, they had an idea of what they were going to find. Just 4 years earlier, in 1995, police had found the bullet-ridden body of an alleged sex worker along the same stretch of road, given its remote location, about 20 miles from downtown St. Louis. It was a known dumping ground for criminals, making this new body a likely victim of a homicide. The body was face down. A slim 5'6" African-American man in filthy Lee blue jeans and a stained white t-shirt. But there was no murder weapon to be found anywhere, no signs of a struggle, and given the remote location, no witnesses. The victim was in an extreme state of decomposition that suggested he had been here for weeks. In fact, it was pure luck that he was discovered at all before his remains had rotted away to nothing. The investigators found no identifying documentation on the body besides an emergency room ticket and 2 pieces of paper crumpled inside his front pocket, containing what seemed like random scribbles, a jumbled mess of letters and numbers spread across more than 30 lines of text. At first glance, it was total gibberish, but when they looked closer, investigators realized it wasn't random at all. Combinations of letters repeated over and over again, with some sections circled as if items on a to-do list had been checked off or prioritized. Numbers appeared sporadically throughout: 74, 75, 194, and parentheses grouped certain letter combinations. To authorities, it seemed like someone had taken considerable time and thought to create these notes. The whole text seemed deliberate, structured, almost coded. With nothing to immediately identify the victim, the next step was to send the body in for forensic identification. Luckily, the fingertips happened to still be in good enough shape and actually matched a name in the database: Ricky McCormick, a 41-year-old gas station employee, a man that, to their surprise, had never been reported missing. Armed with a name, the detectives hoped to find someone who could explain Ricky's final hours and how he ended up at the edge of a remote cornfield so far from the city. So they searched for people who knew him, like Ricky's girlfriend, Sandra. In her interview with the police, Sandra confirmed that Ricky did not own a car and often hitchhiked or took public transport to get where he had to go. Detectives had already started to wonder about this. The crime scene was beside a road, yet there was no sign of any vehicle driven by Ricky, nor was there anything registered to his name. He lived 20 miles away from the crime scene, and no public transportation served such a remote area. So how did he get there? According to Ricky's family, as an adult, he had suffered from chronic health problems, specifically in his heart and lungs, for years. He often complained of severe asthma and persistent chest pain, aggravated by his heavy smoking and consumption of caffeinated beverages, up to 20 a day, according to those who knew him well. Ricky could have walked to his resting place. Given the extent of his health issues, he might have walked all the way there and died from the physical strain combined with the 90-degree heat. But also given his health conditions, it's hard to believe he made that 6-hour or longer trek in the first place. The most likely alternative is that someone brought him there, dumped his body, and fled, which would hint at an act of homicide. But at this point, the body was so decomposed, there were no clear signs of a struggle. There were no witnesses, and no evidence left at the scene. However, there was one lead: the emergency room ticket found in his pocket. According to hospital records, Ricky walked into the Barnes Jewish Hospital on June 22nd complaining of chest pains and shortness of breath, common for someone with chronic heart and lung problems. The doctors found his symptoms severe enough that he was admitted for observation and kept in there for 2 days before being released on June 24th. After leaving the hospital, he visited his favorite aunt, Gloria. Usually, they would talk about everything, his life, his frustrations. But this time, Gloria told the police that he revealed little about what he was going through, declining her offer to drive him where he needed to go, and left after only an hour. The detectives discovered that the very next day, the 25th, he went to another emergency room 2 miles away, once again complaining of breathing difficulties, this time after mowing the grass. But the doctors diagnosed it as another asthma flare-up and allowed him to go home that same evening. But apparently, he didn't. Aunt Gloria told the police she had heard Ricky had spent the night in the hospital waiting room, but was it because of his supposed health issues, or another threat to his life entirely? Gloria began to suspect things weren't right. Maybe he knew he got into something that put his life on the line. He knew he could have stayed here, but maybe he didn't want to put my life on the line. The next morning on June 26th, Ricky called his girlfriend Sandra to tell her he was on his way to get food from the gas station. Little did she know, that would be the last time she spoke to him. The next day, June 27th, was the last confirmed sighting of Ricky, spotted at the gas station by an employee. The detectives were now starting to see the picture forming, but there were still huge gaps in the timeline and a lack of understanding of Ricky's motivations. In most cases, the pathologists could clear it up with a single cause of death, but that wouldn't happen here. Even after the autopsy, the unusually advanced decomposition of the body made it almost impossible to identify the cause of death, leaving it undetermined. The only thing the pathologist knew for sure was that this man hadn't been dead for weeks, as the decomposition suggested. If the gas station employees saw him on the 27th and his body was found on the 30th, he would have only been dead for, at most, 3 days. So then why were his remains so decomposed? On June 27th, 1999, St. Louis was going through a severe heat wave with record-breaking temperatures with a high of 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or 32 degrees Celsius, and humidity at around 85%. Over the next few days, the heat would decrease, but only slightly. Forensic studies have shown that once decomposition begins, it keeps momentum. The extreme, intense heat of the first day would have plausibly accelerated the onset of the decomposition, giving it a head start for his 3-day timeline. The intense heat can cause drastic tissue changes that alter the appearance of wounds within the first 24 to 48 hours. Factor in insects consuming tissue, and you have a body that has been wiped of almost all identifiable injuries in days. Almost all. The pathologists did find one possible injury. For more than 2 decades, the public had been led to believe that Ricky's cause of death had been completely undetermined due to his state of decomposition, but that was just all the police had revealed up to that point. In 2025, authorities released some documents, including a 2001 letter from one of the detectives revealing that they did find a cut to the throat and that it was believed to be the cause of death. So clearly, they knew somebody must have wanted Ricky dead. In her interview, Sandra mentioned that Ricky had been acting strangely, in a way he never had before. They lived in an apartment complex with a lot of criminal and drug activity, though apparently neither of them had been concerned about it. Until recently, that is. Ricky worked at an Amoco gas station, but he had recently taken on a side job picking up and delivering packages for money, a job that would often take him out of state. If that sounds a lot like drug trafficking to you, that's because it was. Sandra recalled that Ricky would travel across the U.S. on Greyhound buses, bringing back marijuana in Ziploc bags the size of baseballs. In 1999, he had made 2 trips to Florida, calling her from his hotel room to keep her updated on how he was doing. But after his last trip to Orlando on June 15th, he seemed unusually scared and increasingly anxious. When she eventually asked him who the Ziploc bags belonged to, Ricky said he was holding them for Baja, one of the 2 brothers who ran the gas station where he worked. When Ricky's body was found, Sandra's thoughts came back to Baja. She told investigators, if anyone was going to hurt Ricky, it would probably be Bob Hamdallah. The Amoco gas station had quite a history of violence, dating all the way back to its original owner, Fawaz Hamdan. In May 1994, Fawaz killed his neighbor with a butcher knife in the middle of an argument in the front yard, a crime that led to his conviction and imprisonment, forcing the gas station to be sold to new ownership. Juma Hamdallah became the new boss, though he operated the gas station under a fake name, David Radigan. It's never been confirmed why he chose not to use his real name, though any good detective will tell you that it was probably because he was up to something illegal. Juma hired his brother, Baha Bob Hamdallah, to help run the business. The only problem was that the two of them did not get along at all. Their personalities clashed constantly. While Juma managed to stay under the radar, his brother Baha was a loud and dangerous presence who made himself known to police after attempting to commit a drive-by shooting in 1997. Just 9 months after that arrest, he opened fire on his other brother, Bajat. Despite having an opportunity to get Baha arrested, Bajat lied to protect his younger brother. Later that same month, Baha was arrested again on a second-degree assault charge for beating a homeless man, Elro Carr, with a rusty hammer. According to Elro, Baha had just tried to get him off the property, but when he refused, Baha decided to take care of it himself. The investigators had pursued the case intently, determined to get Baha off the streets. But 2 weeks before the trial, Elro Carr was mysteriously gunned down, ending the case against Baha for good. With nobody to testify on what happened, the case remained unsolved. However, sources quietly told the investigators that there was no doubt he was killed at the behest of Baha Hamdallah. Detectives working the Ricky McCormick case knew that Baha would be a key suspect. He had known links to gang members throughout St. Louis City and was also reported to be regularly using drugs, as well as owning several weapons, including handguns and knives. Now, they had confirmation from Sandra that Ricky was transporting drugs for a man who had repeatedly shown a willingness to commit murder. That's why when Sandra learned about her boyfriend's death, her mind went straight to Baha. It lined up too perfectly. But the investigators had also found another suspect, one much closer to home, Gregory Lamar Knox. Gregory was a well-known drug dealer who operated in and around the complex where Ricky and Sandra lived. Like Baha, he was extremely well known to the authorities, having been named a suspect in multiple homicides, including at least 2 murder-for-hire schemes. However, the investigators had another reason to suspect him. A second, unrelated investigation had already linked Gregory to the Hamdallah brothers. What that investigation was remains unknown publicly. But from that investigation, a confidential informant told the police that Gregory was responsible for the murder of a black man who had worked at a gas station on Chateau Avenue, with the victim's body dumped near West Alton. Those details matched the Ricky McCormick case exactly. With 2 credible suspects and a fairly complete picture of their victims' final hours, the investigators got to work on staking out their potential killers. For weeks, investigators watched the gas station, the homes of both Hamdallah brothers, and Gregory's apartment complex. All they needed was something that would credibly tie them to the murder, even if it was just confirmation of the supposed drug racket Ricky was apparently involved with. But despite almost constant surveillance for weeks, they got absolutely nothing to link the suspects to Ricky's death. The case had gone completely cold. The suspects they had were effectively cleared, regardless of whether or not they were truly involved, and there were no more witnesses to offer any information. But while the murder case had fizzled out, there was still something that could lead to a solution: Ricky's past. Through interviews with his closest friends and family, a picture began to emerge of a man who had lived through challenging conditions. From an early age, it was clear that Ricky was different. He told odd stories that concerned teachers and classmates alike, and stood alone at recess so often that the school would end up calling his mother out of concern for his mental well-being. But his mother, Frankie, clearly had something of a complicated relationship with her own son. In interviews with police, she would describe him using the R word, speaking bluntly about his mental capacity. It was that complicated dynamic that sent him running into the arms of his favorite aunt, Gloria, whenever he needed help or someone to talk to. His cousin Charles seemed to think of him as a brother. Aside from his mother, his family spoke highly of him. Yet detectives soon discovered that Ricky's past was more complicated. He wasn't an innocent man. In November 1992, the then 34-year-old Ricky had been arrested by St. Louis police for fathering 2 children with a girl under 14, whom he had been involved with since she was just 11 years old. His family knew her only by the name he gave her, Pretty Baby. During legal proceedings, Ricky's public defender was convinced he might be suffering from some mental disease or defect and requested a mental health evaluation to be sure. Dr. Michael Armour, a local psychologist, evaluated Ricky at the former St. Louis State Hospital and agreed that he was mentally unfit for trial. But the prosecution disagreed. Their evaluations came back clean, certifying that he was fit. He ultimately served 13 months in prison before being released for good behavior. When asked about his mental health, Aunt Gloria told investigators that a psychiatrist said Ricky had a brick wall in his mind. He said Ricky refused to break that wall. He didn't like the life of living poor and had an active imagination. That wall had been in place from a very early age. Throughout his school life, Ricky had been shuffled along from grade to grade without the ability to read or write. His teachers didn't want to have to deal with that. By the time he reached high school, he was functionally illiterate and dropped out within the first few years. The only thing he could write was his name. He couldn't spell anything, just scribble. According to the detectives, some unidentified family members had told them that Ricky's illiteracy was so bad that he would usually write in code as a child, something that none of the family could ever understand or decipher. As far as they were concerned, he was illiterate. But perhaps the coded notes found on his body were the latest version of those scribbles that Ricky's cousin described. This is one of the reasons why detectives believe those 2 pages of indecipherable notes in Ricky's pocket may well hold the key to whatever happened to him. Trying to decipher it, however, would be all but impossible for the St. Charles County Sheriff's Department. They needed experts who knew what they were doing.
Oh, ouch.
Oh, hey Grill, what's up?
Oh, hey, bro. Geez, I could really use an expert who knew what they were doing, preferably of the legal variety. You see, I received a workplace injury due to negligence of another party. Ouch.
Well, you could always contact...
Does this sound familiar to you? Well, if so, I might have a solution for you. Hi, I'm Grill Burns. Have you ever heard of the Bill of Wrongs? Yeah, me neither. You know what I have heard of? The Bill of Rights. And so have our sponsors, Morgan & Morgan, because they defend your rights if you've been wronged. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm with over 1,000 attorneys and more than 100 offices nationwide. You can check out how much a client in Florida got. The insurance offered $350,000, but Morgan & Morgan got them a whopping $12 mil. Another client was offered $0. You kidding me? Well, then Morgan & Morgan comes in and gets them $20 million. They've been fighting for people for over 35 years. Ready to battle it out if you end up working with them. Wiccaw! So listen up, if you get injured because of someone else's negligence, you deserve to get paid. And guess what? Their fee is free unless you win. You can start your claim now with Morgan & Morgan by clicking the link below in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. You can just fill in a bit of info and click start your claim. Easy peasy, come on. Because you know what I always say? If you want a fortune of massive proportion, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming, where the Sheriff's Department were looking for some experts of the code-breaking variety.
In late 2001, the notes landed on the desk of Dan Olson, a forensic analyst at the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, or CRRU for short. For decades, the CRRU has been the FBI's elite code-breaking division, tasked with deciphering encrypted evidence in criminal cases. They had worked the Zodiac killer case, cracked Nazi spy codes in World War II, and regularly unraveled ciphers used by gangs, drug dealers, and organized crime groups. If anyone could unlock Ricky's mysterious code, it would be them. But from the moment Dan and his team examined the notes, they knew this case was different and quickly determined that, yes, this was, in fact, a cipher. The structure and patterning of the letters and characters suggested there was thought and intent behind it. It wasn't just the ramblings of someone who was mentally unwell. It doesn't happen often that we have an unsolved cipher of this length and significance. The characters are not random. There are many E's, for example, that could be used as a spacer. There are many characteristics that suggest it could be solved. Many patterns. The only problem was that they had never seen a cipher quite like this one, and they had absolutely nothing to compare it to. It didn't help that the investigation up to this point had led to very little in terms of context clues. All they really knew was that this man was allegedly illiterate, but wrote in code, was involved to some degree in drug trafficking, and that someone had killed him. In fact, it wasn't even clear if Ricky even wrote these notes, or if someone else did and just planted them on his body. But if he was the author, then it could mean these 2 pages of notes might offer his whereabouts before the murder, or other useful clues that could unlock the entire mystery of the case. If someone else had written the notes, then it would thrust the case into an entirely new direction. Could it be a serial killer? For all we know, the meaning of this text could be some kind of taunting breadcrumbs, not unlike what the Zodiac killer once did with his handwritten codes. Either way, the notes were the only remaining clue that they had to work with, and Dan and the CRRU team took that very seriously. Their first attempt to solve the cipher was to do it the way the CRRU had always done it, manually. Dan went through the entire notes with nothing but graph paper and a pencil, dissecting each string of letters and numbers to try and find any obvious pattern in the language that could be applied to English. However, the pattern never emerged. The CRRU is one of the most advanced cipher-breaking units in the world, armed with state-of-the-art software designed to perform extensive statistical analysis on any cipher that is presented to it. In 2001, the technology was much more primitive than it is today, but it was still consistently accurate. Yet the Ricky McCormick notes stumped the computer too. However, the computer had noticed the same things Dan had spotted manually. E's seemed to be acting as spacers. The same combination of letters were coming up over and over again. There was definitely a structure underpinning this code. It wasn't just any kind of cipher the CRRU had ever seen. For the next decade, Dan and his team worked to try to decipher the code. Every time their software was updated, they would try again. They'd bring in experts from around the world to try their hand at the code, but they were no closer to understanding what they were looking at. By 2009, Dan was beginning to accept the situation. They were no closer to uncovering the meaning behind the cipher. If they really wanted to unravel the mystery here, they were going to have to branch out beyond the intelligence industry. Fortunately, they knew just the right people. The American Cryptogram Association was a group of amateur code-breaking enthusiasts who had successfully solved puzzles that had stumped even professional cryptographers. Now, it might seem strange for an agency like the FBI to reach out to, well, average everyday people to solve such a murder case like this, but at this point, they had no alternative. The puzzle was presented at the group's annual convention in Niagara Falls, Ontario, to a room full of experienced codebreakers eager to tackle the mystery. But much to the CRRU's disappointment, even these skilled amateurs found themselves baffled by what they were looking at. Ricky's cipher operated according to rules that no one could discern. According to the room, it was completely and utterly indecipherable. For an entire decade, the CRRU had worked to crack McCormick's code. They had applied every credible cipher, used all of their computing power, reached out to experts and gifted amateurs alike, and it had led them to the same conclusion as the pathologist who inspected Ricky's body and the sheriff's department who investigated his murder. Undetermined. The CRRU team now had two choices: give up entirely, or turn it over to the largest group of people who might have a shot at working it all out. The entire general public, something the FBI rarely does. Dan issued a statement reading, "We are really good at what we do, but we could use some help with this one." In a way, this was a rare admission of defeat, publicly admitting that the FBI simply could not get the job done. But it's a strategy that does make sense. In 1969, the first Zodiac cipher was solved by a schoolteacher and his wife at their kitchen table. On March 29, 2011, a two-part press release went up on FBI.gov. In Part 1, Breaking Codes to Stop Crime, the FBI explains the role of the CRRU and gives a quick crash course in code breaking. In Part 2, Help Solve an Open Murder Case, they released Ricky's notes in full for anyone online to look over. In the article, they wrote, "To move the case forward, examiners need another sample of McCormick's coded system, or a similar one, that might offer context to the mystery notes or allow valuable comparisons to be made. Or, short of new evidence," Olson said, "maybe someone with a fresh set of eyes might come up with a brilliant new idea." Despite everything, they were still convinced that this was a solvable cipher, and that belief was adopted by others as well. One cryptologist in St. Charles told Fox 2 that, "It feels to me that there is an actual rhythm to it, that there's something that's being communicated, that it's not just random letters being written by someone who is schizophrenic and writing odd characters." The FBI was hoping for a miracle to some degree. The likelihood of the public being able to crack this seemingly uncrackable code was pretty low, but not impossible. But if they were going to have any shot at actually figuring it out, they would have to know how to break a code as well as the experts. So the FBI presented the public with a simple 4-step framework to decode these systems. 1. Determining the language used. Is the underlying message in English, Spanish, or some other language? Usually that's the easiest part to identify if you know the target you're looking at. 2. Determining the system used. Is it a substitution cipher, transposition cipher, or something more complex? 3. Reconstructing the key. What specific method was used to transform the plaintext into ciphertext? 4. Reconstructing the plaintext. Using the key to reverse the encryption and reveal the original message. Now, let's go over a simple example. Say that a note was found taped under a cafeteria table at Riverside Correctional Prison. It's a crumpled piece of paper that reads like this. To most guards, it's just your usual gibberish, but to an FBI cryptanalyst, the structure shows that it's a cipher waiting to be cracked. We just have to unravel it. So, following the FBI's time-tested approach that we've already taken a look at, we begin our methodical attack in order. 1. Identify the language. Those double letters and 3-letter combinations have a familiar rhythm to English. 2. Determine the system. This looks like a pretty simple substitution cipher, where each letter might represent another letter. 3. Find the key. Here's where the real detective work begins. We start with the simplest possibility, a Caesar cipher. If it doesn't work, we can always pivot to more complicated cipher types. 4. Recover the message. Time to reverse engineer the original text. The Caesar cipher is super basic, like what you might find on the back of children's cereal boxes, but you've got to master it before you can tackle anything bigger. Think of a Caesar cipher as 2 concentric circles, each containing the alphabet, one larger than the other. For the inner circle alphabet, every letter shifts or rotates the same number of position forward or backward in the outer circle alphabet. If A becomes D, then B becomes E, C becomes F, and so on. We might try different shift values on the prison note. Shifting backward by 3 positions, B becomes M, W becomes T, H becomes E, and the gibberish PHHWPH transforms into Meet Me. The full message emerges when you unlock the rest. Meet me at the yard at midnight. The shipment arrives tomorrow. Bring the cash. Doesn't sound good. In a Caesar cipher, there are only 25 possible shifts to test. It's very easy to solve, but it's also extremely uncommon to find criminals who stick to such basic encryption. The Caesar cipher is what's known as a monoalphabetic cipher. Other monoalphabetic ciphers change the letters, but in more random patterns. A might become Q, B becomes F, C becomes X, but each letter always maps to the same substitute. Theoretically, this is harder to crack, but not by much. This is where frequency analysis becomes a key asset for a codebreaker. The English language has a personality built into it. The letter E appears about 12% of the time, and T shows up 9.6%. Any long enough message, whatever letter appears most often is probably an E or a T in disguise. If you work out one or the other, you've essentially cracked the code of a monoalphabetic cipher. You just have to apply it to all the other letters. When criminals get really sophisticated, they turn to polyalphabetic ciphers, which means that one letter could be mapped to multiple letters, instead of just one. The most popular one is the Vigenère cipher. Instead of one scrambled alphabet, this system cycles through multiple alphabets using a keyword. It's like having several Caesar ciphers that take turns, constantly changing the code as you try to unravel it. Usually it's using a formula, like this right here. But to make things easier, let's instead look at this graph, where each row and column shifts the alphabet by 1. I know it looks complex, but it isn't. Let's say the prisoner now sends the message to the outside, JCSRFTSBGVI. It's extremely serious, and we have only moments to decipher it. Through our super decryption skills, we determine the key is brew. So we use the word brew, repeating to match the length of the original text. One by one, we match the letters. The first letter of the key is B, which lines up with J in the code. So we look at the row B, follow it until we reach J. At the top of that column is the decrypted letter, I. We keep going. R goes to C, which becomes L. E to S becomes O. As we keep going, it deciphers the text and turns into, I love coffee. It seems the prisoner has good taste. The code is easy to break once you have the key, but finding that key is the hard part. It's too complex to fully explain here, but in simple terms, first you need to determine the length of the keyword mathematically or by looking for patterns. Then, seeing as each letter of the unknown keyword is its own shifted alphabet, each one is its own Caesar cipher. So we would crack it via the frequency method we mentioned before, assigning E or T for the most common letters, and then work our way down. In the entirety of the cipher library, there's only one that remains mathematically uncrackable, the one-time pad. If your key is as long as your message, truly random, and never reused, even infinite computing power can't break it. Fortunately, it's wildly impractical for criminals and, therefore, never really used in the real world. Except for maybe espionage or nuclear codes. In fact, it's extremely rare to find any code or cipher in the modern world that is undecipherable, given enough time, data, and computing power. Even the famous Enigma machine used by Nazi Germany wasn't truly unbreakable, even if thought so at the time. It was a mechanized polyalphabetic cipher with rotating wheels where each keystroke scrambled the alphabet. Some described it as a super Vigenère cipher, but it is far more complex. At one moment, A might be D. Then, with another keystroke, it might be T due to the rotor change, and it changed each day. The Allies cracked it in a multitude of ways, such as exploiting predictable German message formats, like the weather, or routine salute sign-offs, which are known as cribs. Enigma gave codebreakers patterns, with mountains of messages to work with. The problem with Ricky's notes is that there were only 2 pieces of paper, and they had proven too small a sample size to be able to discern a pattern that they could use to break it. The FBI had tried brute force attacks, basically trial and error, frequency analyses, and even cribs, along with all the other cryptology methods for breaking codes, without success. Nothing seemed to work, so maybe the best chance at cracking the code was with the help of the public. When the FBI released Ricky's notes, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, the story had spread across the internet like wildfire. Cipher and decrypting communities on Reddit, web sleuths, and Google groups flooded the FBI with their attempted solves, and the FBI was not prepared. Within a matter of hours, the FBI website, which was hosting the notes, crashed under the traffic, forcing them to set up a dedicated page to handle submissions and theories. But even then, the amount of input was overwhelming. They started asking the public to send letters, if possible, rather than emails, another effort to try to calm the overwhelming amount of responses they got. Major news outlets like the New York Times, the Daily Mail, and even New Scientist were covering the case the FBI could not crack, and the story was even reaching countries where the FBI had no jurisdiction. Everybody was talking about the inexplicable mystery of what was hiding within these pages. Not everybody online was immediately on board, though. Sure, the internet loved the idea of solving the mystery and cracking the code that the FBI could not, but they were suspicious of a government agency inexplicably asking the public for their input. They believed there were ulterior motives. I do know that the FBI has been showing up at security conferences saying they were understaffed for dealing with cybercrime, and encouraging people at these conferences to consider working for them. Maybe the crypto puzzle is an attempt to find members of the public with an aptitude for that sort of thing. Nice try, FBI. How about we discuss the paycheck first? There was also the issue that the public knew next to nothing about the case. Up to this point, they knew from FBI notes that Ricky's body had been found in a remote field with inexplicable codes in his pockets and no clear cause of death. There was also an article mentioning Ricky's childhood habit of writing in code, but that was it. They knew nothing about his criminal affiliations, the Humdillah brothers, or his arrest and incarceration, frustrating many amateur codebreakers. The fact that they are hoping fresh eyes with no background information or access to any of the police records, etc., will crack the code is pretty absurd. Guess maybe they just want different ideas. Here's this random string of letters and numbers with no context. Tell me what they mean. But the FBI refused to offer more information. Meanwhile, forums all over the internet were starting to speculate despite what little they had. Web Sleuths, a forum dedicated to solving crimes, was jumping headfirst into the case. User Smarty Time did what any good cryptologist would. They analyzed the frequency. What they discovered was that there were many repeats of character strings, or words. At least 6 9-character words appeared repeatedly, and the fewer characters, the more frequently the word showed up. That's the reason user FrontOutrageous8224 on R Codes suggested it might be the classic Vigenère cipher. He theorized that a short key was being used, which might explain the repetition of certain strings. But one of the commenters simply responded with, "Vigenère doesn't fit. The index of coincidence is too high." That's due to frequency, how often letters appear to indicate the language being used. The higher the index of coincidence, the more likely it's tied to a language and is using a simple substitution method. A polyalphabetic cipher, like the Vigenère cipher, would be far more random. User Smarty Time confirmed this when they analyzed the frequency of single letters as well. N was found 90 times, S 99 times, and E was the most common at 135 times. While E is the most common letter in the English language, that should apply to the original message only, known as the plaintext, and not for the coded message. However, that could also hint at it being another type of cipher we haven't discussed, a transposition cipher. Users on Hacker News were speculating on that as a possible solution. Exactly. To clarify, a transposition cipher is one that just scrambles the letters in the plaintext according to some algorithm to get the ciphertext, which would cause you to get the same letter frequencies as the plaintext. The problem is figuring out the rules of transposition so you can reverse them to decipher. There are tons of possibilities, and you can't exactly plug a corpus this large into an anagram solver. Web Sleuths member Whitehat threw in their expertise as a lead IT consultant. They too first thought it might be a transposition cipher, but mixed with a substitution system. It was a rare system called the Nihilist cipher, used by Russian spies, where each letter is turned into a number, and they scrambled it with a key. But that, along with a few other systems he tried, didn't fit. He even tried the simple Caesar cipher, which is often referred to as ROT for the rotary that is often used with the cipher. Less likely was rot, but just to say I did, I attempted a full spectrum rot and also turned up empty-handed on that account. That's not surprising. If it was using the kind of cipher found on the back of cereal boxes, the FBI should have solved it a long time ago. But as mentioned before, the FBI did give a suggestion as to why there were so many E's. They were spaces, something that others, like user herptyderpty on Reddit, were realizing as well. I think that E stands for the end of a word. Here's why. 1. It's after all the words in the directions. For example, this string of letters equals first proceed on D's 71, D equals the. 2. If E is always being used as a space, then how does he write an E if needed? Well, he's telling you, NCBE equals and CBE. While many sat around trying to figure out the system, others claimed to have solved it. Like Redditor Imperial Barb on our cipher. I noticed the letters ACSM in the top right of the note and used it as the decryption keyword, and this resulted. My name is Ricky McCormick, deceased. I live in St. Louis, Mo area. The following notes and ciphers were found in my notebook. I am hoping that they can be decrypted and explain my death. The notes may not be in order. My killer is... Imperial Barb claimed that the decoded note was a long apology from an unknown person. Ricky, I am writing to you because I have a lot on my mind. I have been thinking about this for a long time, and I have finally decided to write you about it. I hope that you are doing well. I am doing okay, I guess. I have been better, but I have also been worse. I just wanted to let you know that I am sorry for what I did. I never meant for things to turn out the way that they did. I just hope that you can find it in your heart to forgive me. But Redditors were starting to think something was off about this methodology. Not to sound like a high school math teacher, but he didn't show his work. If we go with the FBI's 4 steps for solving a cipher, 1. Identify the language, 2. Determine the system, 3. Find the key, and 4. Recover the message, he skipped number 2, determine the system. We know Ricky spoke English, which is why so many people were working on the second step, the same step the FBI got stuck on. Yet, Imperial Barb often didn't reveal what systems he used, or he claimed some of those systems changed throughout the note. He would remove random letters, claiming they were spaces, or change the cipher to other words just to make it work. Basically, he seemed to be making things up. Others tried to reproduce what he did and got nothing, like when user Automatic Occasion 38 tried the Vigineer cipher on a random string of letters. What they got as a result was just another random string of letters. Running this code you provided on text does not in any universe produce what you're saying it does. User Mindraker tried it also. I must not be understanding the application of the keyword, because when I do so, I get different results. Imperial Barb never responded to them, so what might have seemed like a brilliant solution was likely all smoke and mirrors, or just another person who truly believed they were onto something when they actually weren't even close. This tends to happen often when there's a popular code to decrypt. People claim to have solved it, but their solution is flimsy at best, just like the information they had on Ricky. Users felt like they were running into a brick wall because of the information gaps, like this user, White Hat. This is where I get frustrated. I believe that this cipher does not use a typical cipher process. I think it's entirely possible that this man created his own personal coding system after decades of familiarity with known systems. This tells me that we would need to delve into his personal life at the time and find out what instances we might find similar formatting. But eventually, they would get their wish. The following year, in 2012, the Riverfront Times posted an extensive article about the case, finally offering up information from the FBI that the general public never knew, like Ricky's drug affiliations and criminal charges, the police investigation into the Humdallahs, and his family dynamics. More importantly, this is when the public learned about his supposed illiteracy from the family. Even with all this new information, some still believed it could be code. We should not dismiss McCormick's intelligence and ability to concoct codes just because he was uneducated. I think McCormick's notes are some sort of code, but a very idiosyncratic code, probably riddled with spelling errors. After the article, the attempts to break the code veered away from ciphers and ventured into the possibility that this was some sort of shorthand. What if it isn't a code? He had trouble communicating, such as talking and writing. What if he spelled words out based on how he thought they were spelled because of the way he pronounced them? For instance, instead of pterodactyl, he thought it was spelled pterodactyl because of the way it sounds. As for what that shorthand writing could be about, there was speculation all across the board, both before and after the article. Some thought it was connected to a recording studio, because some of the 2 or 3 letter sequences matched with common electrical connectors, despite Ricky having no known connection to music. Others believed it might be car parts, but then Ricky didn't even own a car. Using his criminal background as context clues, they started to piece together more plausible solutions. I see a drug dealer list, fairly high up, feeding his own dealers who are then dealing with small amounts to buyers. The code looks to me like who belonged to originally, who it was handed off to, quantity, money specifics, the mid-dealer's street name. It might be directions related to some criminal activity. If you look at the St. Louis map, near Bellevue, you see streets like WJ Street. That would look weird even if properly decoded. Then, in August 2025, someone posted a very plausible solution. Again, using context clues, specifically that Ricky didn't own a car and used the bus, Redditor These Business 1535 posted their belief that the code was actually bus routes. When you break them down, they aren't random. They repeatedly mention 71, 74, 75, 29, 173, which aren't gibberish, but real Metro bus route numbers in North St. Louis County. Example, 74 Florissant, 75 Lilac Hanley, 71 Parker. They end many entries with NCBE, which look like shorthand for North County Bus Endpoint Exchange, what we now call the North County Transit Center, the major bus hub in Ferguson, Missouri. If this is true, it may reveal the final trip that Ricky took and reveal something vital to the investigation. However, the entire message hasn't been solved yet, nor has this been verified. It may well be one of the many attempts that leads nowhere, even if it sounds promising. Perhaps, somehow, many of these theories are correct. It may be addresses, bus routes, medical notes, and drug records, organized in a way only Ricky understood. Or perhaps it's truly just scribblings. As many others speculated, just a schizophrenic man's journal. Not everything is mysterious. My immediate thought was it's not some elaborate code. It was an illiterate man's writing system. He was illiterate. The family said he liked to occasionally write down meaningless chicken scratch, which was the closest he came to writing. This is abundantly clear from the testimony of his family. Even Dan Olson, head of the CRRU, admitted that all of this attempted code breaking might not lead anywhere. But he's of the belief that it shouldn't be abandoned. Even if we found out he was writing a grocery list or a love letter, we would still want to see how the code is solved. This is a cipher system we know nothing about. For the CRRU, solving a new cipher would be a valuable new tool, not only to understand what happened to Ricky, but also to help them with any future coded messages. Yet, despite all the attempts by amateur sleuths around the world, as of the time of uploading this video, it remains unsolved. It's been over 26 years since Ricky's body was found, and 12 years since those encrypted notes were released to the public. We don't know if the CRRU is still working on the case, but given the lack of new information, they may be no closer to resolving it. The CRRU examines hundreds of suspected codes annually, and only about 1% go unbroken, which means Ricky's notes have joined this elite group of unsolvable ciphers. The simple truth may be that there are too many factors that make this code almost impossible to decode. The most likely outcome of them all is the idea that Ricky developed his own shorthand just for himself. For someone with limited literacy, this would create a deeply personal communication system that only he could understand. Ricky was also a man who lived a very difficult life and struggled with his mental health. If these writings represent his private thoughts, there's a legitimate question about whether they should remain private, regardless of their potential connection to his death. It would be like releasing someone's private diary onto the internet for everybody to see without their permission. So, even if we crack the code, would we want to? Nick Pelling at Cipher Mysteries wrote, "What strikes me most powerfully is that, quite unlike other cipher mysteries, I don't actually want to read what was written on McCormick's 2 notes. All I'm actually left with is a feeling of deep sadness, that what we're glimpsing into in these notes is the life of a poor, illiterate guy who aspired to ride the horse of opportunity but only ever got dragged behind it." But of course, Ricky was not exactly an innocent person. Yes, he may have had an undiagnosed mental illness, and he was in an increasingly bad situation that likely killed him, but he was also actively involved in the drug trade. He may have been taken advantage of by Baja and others like him, but we'll never actually know. And in the end, as the FBI has stated, breaking the code could reveal the victim's whereabouts before his death and could lead to the solution of a homicide. As for Baja and Gregory Knox, both eventually had to face justice. In 2002, Baja was convicted of first-degree murder after shooting a customer at a food market in Madison, Illinois. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison, only to have the case overturned in 2006 on a technicality. Baja's lawyer hadn't called a gunshot residue expert to testify. After a retrial 2 years later, he was acquitted on claims of self-defense, walking out of court a free man. His brother, Bajit, you'll remember him as the one Baja shot at, has since stated that Baja was attempting to rebuild his life after his legal troubles, marrying and relocating to Cleveland, Ohio. The gas station is now under new ownership. Gregory was arrested in 2000 on charges of possession of narcotics with the intent to distribute. He served time in Lexington, Kentucky, and is now believed to be a free man. In 2012, when he was contacted in prison by Riverfront Times, asking about his involvement in the Ricky McCormick murder, he responded, "At this moment, this is all new information to me, and I have no information that could help your case." The FBI's cryptanalysis unit continues to list Ricky's cipher among their top unsolved cases, but there have been no new updates on the case outside of the 2025 documents that revealed a cut to his throat. In Dan Olson's words, "Can it be solved? Yes, I'm absolutely confident, but you can't just will it." If you're interested in taking a crack at cracking the code, then you can view the notes in the FBI's press release through the link that we will leave down in the description. And if you found this video interesting, then consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. It's the best thing you can do to help us keep making more videos, like this one about how a man accidentally solved a 48-year cold case by installing a pool in his backyard. Click the video on screen to watch now.